Okay, hello, Kuna. I have here Michael Law, who's a speaker, former Fox Radio Network contributor, author of The Founders Revolution, Precinct Committeeman of 2308 in Kuna, um, lifetime born in Idaho, right? Raised up in
Yep.
Kuna, and we're here to talk about the process of recommendations that District 23 did for various candidates that were running. This was back in March 29th. This came up because uh, candidate Dygert, who's running for representative of the House in Idaho for District 23, he's running against Tina Lambert, and this post here, he wrote, I know District 23's challenges and pledge to represent us all. Remember, a few PCs don't speak for all of us. Let's protect and promote our agricultural heritage and what matters most to us together. Um, so I commented on that, referring to this process, and Michael Law also started commenting on that post as well. And also, the campaign page started deleting posts. Now, your comments are still there. So,
Good.
yeah, he didn't get around to hiding them. Um, so, I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about what precinct committeemen do and kind of the process you guys went through for this to come to these recommendations of Representative Tina Lambert, uh, Chris Bruce, who's also running for a different House seat A, and Senator Todd Lakey.
Sure. So, precinct committeemen, we're really kind of the grassroots people within our own precincts, especially, but for the district. So, a number of things we do, we talk about resolutions that we might want to send to the legislature on bills or ideas that we want to see passed, or just letting our voices be known on behalf of our precincts. The other thing that is really important that we do, it's the really an important power that we do have, is whenever there is a seat, whether it's a House seat or a Senate seat, that is that is vacated either by death or by getting removed from the seat, or because they resign. It is the power, is our responsibility as precinct committeemen to interview candidates that we would like to see replaced, and we vote and we send three individuals, the names of three individuals, to the governor, and the governor makes the final decision on who to appoint to that empty seat. And that is a really important thing for us to be able to do. So, but the other thing that we do as precinct committeemen is we're the get out the vote people. We help candidates who are running for office to put out signs, put out their flyers and other paraphernalia, things like that. And particularly in our precincts is where we typically work, but we can go anywhere and help wherever we need. And sometimes we don't even necessarily work within our own district. Sometimes precinct committeemen are known to go to other precincts or other districts and help out those just to get out the vote. So those are some of the things that we do. Now, in the case of what we've been doing recently with regards to recommendation, is something that our district has been working on for a little while. Really, kind of a not so much a vetting as who's good or who's bad or anything. Like we just want to know where everybody stands. So even before this special meeting to decide who we wanted to recommend as for those representative seats, we sent out candidate surveys, and as precinct committeemen, we were able to review those candidate surveys. Those candidate surveys include things like questions like what have you done inside your community, how have you volunteered, what's the proper role of government, things like that you would find on almost uh, any candidate survey. And in this case, we were able to review before then. There's a committee that also reviewed the current representatives and how they stack up compared with the Idaho GOP platform. There's you can go look that up and see how they voted, as well as other venues that also rate candidates, or not necessarily candidates, but the representatives, and how they voted on bills, and based on their support. So they gave us that. We were able to review the questions, and then we were able to take about 5 minutes. We were split up into 2 or 3 individuals each, and got to interview one candidate at a time. They broke them up by the 5 candidates, as you can see from those pictures, and we interviewed them. We got to ask our own questions that may not necessarily be on the survey, things that are important to us, whether it's pro-abortion, on abortion cases, whether it's financial cases, whether it's agriculture, whether it's government in general, whatever we wanted to ask, we could ask. And we got 5 minutes for each. And then we did 2 rounds of that, 10 minutes. After that time was up, then we dismissed all the candidates and everybody who was not a precinct committeeman or part of the like the chairman and others that also had to be there. And we were able to discuss each candidate seat by seat. So we started with seat A, discussed those individuals if they're a precinct committeeman, like Chris Bruce or Todd Lakey, who are also precinct committeemen. If we were talking about the seat that they're running for, they were dismissed so we could discuss without having to worry about offending anybody. We could openly discuss the things that we talked about with the candidates, as well as the surveys that we may have done and anything else that we may have learned for ourselves. And there were many things that were brought up with regards to that. So we were able to ask other people questions that, listen to the questions and answers that other people were able to ask that we may not necessarily have thought of. So it was a good discussion over each candidate in each seat. And after we did that, those candidates, like Todd Lakey, he wasn't there when we discussed his Senate seat, but he was there when we talked about the other 2 representative seats as a precinct committeeman. Then we brought everybody back in, all the PCs back in, and we voted by secret ballot. There's no names, no nothing. We don't know who's who on that list. I mean, I know who I am because I know how I voted, but it was all done by secret ballot. Those 3 individuals that you see the signatures on, they're the ones that counted and verified those counts. And unlike other districts, we required a 2/3 majority in order for us as a district to recommend that candidate. So not, other districts may be 50%, just a simple majority, but we required a 2/3 super majority. And in this case, all 3 of those seats got 2/3 super majority from the precinct committeeman.
Now, I believe it was 17 that there were 17 votes cast. 3 of them were done by proxy, and then
Correct.
10 were complete no-shows.
That is correct.
So,
so they could have done it. They could have also done it by proxy. Those that were no-shows, 3 of the 17 actually did show. Were no-shows, but they had done it by proxy, and they said they requested, they could request this how I would prefer to vote, and those that were acting as proxies. In fact, one of them specifically said, "I will vote the way that he told me to vote." It may not necessarily be the way I would vote, but he said I would honor his wishes and vote the way he would want to vote. Whether he did or not, I mean, nobody actually knows, including the person he's proxy for. So there's just no way of knowing that. But the result is still the same: 2/3 for each of those candidates.
So just for the audience to know, the final tallies were 15 for Representative Tina Lambert, and then 2 for Sean Dygert, who's competing against her for votes.
Correct.
And then there's Representative Melissa Durant, who's the incumbent. She got 3 versus Chris Bruce, who's a councilman of the city of Kuna, who got 13. And then Todd Lakey, well, he's not running against anyone, but he got 16. Still, somebody abstained from.
Either abstained or voted the other. Yeah, well, I'd only be abstaining because there was no
Yeah.
other choice on that seat.
Okay, so I guess let's kind of discuss maybe what his response was. I posted 15 of the committeemen preferred Representative Tina Lambert, while you only received 2. No explanation was provided for such a large discrepancy. Why do you think there was such a large difference? And then he replied, well, the campaign replied, the Legislative District 23 vetting vote didn't include many precinct committeemen who opposed the process, making it unrepresentative. The significant support I've received from friends, neighbors, concerned citizens, and businesses reflects the true sentiment of LD 23. And then my response to that was regarding the mathematics, because even if you added in 10 of the missing votes, Tina still would have gotten, well, she would have gotten the majority, but not the super majority to get the recommendation, the 2/3.
Correct.
So
Possibly, because we don't know how those other 10 would have voted.
yeah,
And if I remember right, he's saying that, well, they decided to not show up in protest. However, I can tell you that that there are several that just never show up anyway.
right. who shall remain unnamed.
Yeah, I do know of one precinct committeeman that may have not shown up in protest. He normally can't show up on that day, the Thursdays, which is the day that we did it. But he may have been one that that might have not shown up in protest, but more than likely, it's just his typical day that he just can't show up. But as far as the 10, if they did it in protest, that wouldn't be very smart, in my opinion, simply because if they had showed up and they were supportive of Dygert, then that would have canceled out the 2/3 majority, and then there would have only been a majority, and then nobody would have been recommended, because that's how the process works. If it's 2/3, then we recommend. If it's only a majority, nobody gets recommended.
I didn't know about that 2/3 part. So yeah, like you were saying, it would have been strategically advantageous for him to show up, or for those guys at least to show up the proxy vote.
Yeah,
at the very least.
If 6 would have showed up, and they would have all voted for Dygert in Dygert versus Lambert case, then there would have not been 2/3 majority.
Yeah.
So
you went into details in your comments, and I question whether he's actually posting or managing the Facebook page in general.
Right.
Because
nobody has really any idea. But the idea of vetting, it's clear from that, and from his post and others, that he doesn't like the idea of vetting. Well, that is the whole process itself. I mean, we're vetting, all of the voters are going to be vetting Dygert versus Lambert. We're all going to be vetting. What do we like about them? What don't we like about them? That's all that that's all that the District 23 committee did, is like, this is what we like, this is what we don't like, and this is who we're going to vote for. And that's exactly what every single voter is going to do. It's a vetting process. And so the idea of, it's this vetting idea is not any good. Well, why are you running for office then? Because that's exactly what it is. It's a vetting process.
Yeah, it is difficult, because when it's like, when you're not even sure it's unlikely you're even talking to him directly, it's like, who am I really arguing with? And I think this gentleman kind of, copied and pasted some of the responses in other posts as well. So
very well could be. I haven't seen enough of them. I just that one just like, come on, vetting, really? That's the whole point. In fact, he's going to be vetting every single bill. Do I vote for it because of these things, or do I not vote for it? I mean, the political sphere is about vetting.
Now, I
If you're
think
running for office, you're going to be vetted.
so. I think I've tried to piecemeal, their arguments. We don't tend to, or I don't tend to see kind of like these discussions or like a debate between, let's say, establishment and the pro vetting sort of faction. They kind of do editorials back and forth with one
Right,
another. From what I can gather, what they're saying is, or actually, there was a leaked. Um, Tom Luna had a meeting because they were trying to retake Precinct Committeeman. I'm not sure if you
right.
did you hear about that video or see
Just
that?
a little
Okay,
bit.
that
I
came
haven't
out.
actually seen the video.
Yeah, that came out last month. Now, the issue is I don't know to what degree it's just PR because they were saying they're the true grassroots movement. Um, and that you're okay. Well, actually, I guess we can kind of channel Farmer Matt. He did pretty well, but he calls you guys Moonies, Moon Babies, and the John Birch Society. Uh, and I don't know what you can respond to that criticism. You guys are all just following the cult Moonies.
Yeah, there tends to be those that are called right wing extremists, and those that are called the moderates or establishment. There's always that thing going on, and some of the ideas are simply that we need as many people. They want to bring in as many people as possible, and the right wing, they're especially they don't want everybody in as many as possible. We want to exclude some people. Well, one, it's called the First Amendment. We have the right to assemble and a right to associate with whoever we want. If you look at any group that is out there, if you don't pay your dues or if you don't follow their principles, if say you're a church and you don't follow their principles, guess what? You're going to be excluded. And the party platform is what typically we point to. And if you look at how people vote, you can see how they align with that party platform, which is a platform that a lot of them agreed to. And even if they don't agree with everything, they have places where they can point to, well, this is where I disagree, and so forth. But when you start voting almost completely against the party and where it stands for, it's like, why would we want those people in the party? Now, I'm speaking for myself, but the whole point is that as a group, we can decide who we want to bring in and who we don't want. Do we want to bring in communists? No, we don't want communists in our group because they're going to change how the group works and so forth. And they want to. So the reason why they say right wing extremist is, first thing you always have to do is label people, and that's the first thing that you have to do in order to try to get people out that they don't want out. I mean, they want the right wing extremists out, or and the right wing, they may want the establishment people out because they're not voting the way that they want, and I mean, that's what politics is all about. So it's like, just give it a break. In my opinion, just give it a break, and uh, we should be working all together to make things work. But at the same time, better be following the principles, the rules, and everything that we as a group have previously decided. But they're just not doing it, or we're just not doing it. Whomever, I mean, everybody looks at it in their own way. But um, why not have Dorothy Moon people in? Why not have John Birch Society people in? Why not have establishment people in? But if they aren't doing what we expect as a Republican Party individual, if they're voting more Democrat-like than Republican-like, yeah, time for you to go. I mean, that's just that simple.
What is the John Birch Society?
So the John Birch Society is formed quite a few years ago. I don't know a whole lot about them, other than their focus is on the original intent of the Constitution. Um, their focus is on limiting government, because that is what the Constitution says, limiting government to just those simple things that are enumerated in the Constitution itself. And that if we did that, both as a nation and as a state, then things would be vastly different than what they are. Because right now, everything is it's got a price tag on it from government. Everything is regulated by government, and we all also have to pay all that for those regulations, and not just with our taxes, but some people with too much regulation are ending up in prisons and things like that that there's no need for. I mean, they're and that's really kind of what John Birch Society does is like let's get focused back on the Constitution. That is their focus, and so anybody trashing them is like, why? I
So,
don't understand why.
um, I'm pretty sure all of my, immigrant Korean immigrant, parents and citizens, they are citizens. I don't think they've really ever read the Constitution. They might. Do you have to answer those questions? Do you happen to know for citizenship?
Yeah, because my wife was actually she's Japanese and she got
Oh,
her
okay.
citizenship uh, about 10 years ago because she's we just sent in for her second passport, and those are good for 10 years. She got that at the same time that she got her citizenship, so it's been about 10 years. And yes, they do have to go through questions. They have to get at least 60 out of or 60% of the total questions. So they ask you 10 questions. So if you get six, then they stopped. With my wife, they're like, well, you got six of the questions right. She would have got them all right because I taught her exactly. I mean, we went through the questions. They give you the questions ahead of time so you can get an idea. You won't know all the questions because they've got 100 and something questions that you can look at. But yeah, you have to do that. You have to be able to show that you can speak English and you can understand English. You can write it as well. So she has to write a full sentence. She had to read a full sentence and stuff like that. I mean, and the process of becoming a citizen is not only expensive because one of the other things that people don't understand is so when she came here and we started that process, she also had to get a very specific and detailed health examination to make sure she's not bringing any diseases that maybe we can't deal with here in the U.S. From another country. Um, Make sure that they have to go through a background check. She had to go through a background check not only from her country but also here anytime afterwards. So it's a long process, but in the end, if they go through it, uh, those the immigrants tend to do a lot better and tend to know a little bit more about it than the average Joe.
Um, Sorry, going back to Kuna, I believe you. Can you talk about your upbringing in Kuna?
Yeah, I grew up here. My parents moved when I was 3, 5, something like that. I don't remember any other place before we moved to Kuna. They're still living where they were when we first moved out to Kuna. So I graduated here K-13 or K through 12, so 13-year club, and then spent a little time away, but we eventually bought a home back here in 2003. So I lived here and there. So I spent like a couple of years in Florida. Um, Florida kind of sounds nice nowadays, but with that governor and everything. But spent a couple of years there as a translator or as a tour guide for Japanese tourists. I wouldn't say I'm fluent now because that was 20 something years ago. We still speak it a little bit at home with my wife and even the kids. But that's more colloquial. I don't actually do much beyond that. It's kind of weird. She speaks mostly Japanese to me, and I speak English back, and so it's kind of a
Yeah.
interesting. interesting situation. But moved back here in 2003 and been here. I've been here ever since. I've been involved politically since about that same time. I actually really got my startings with interesting situation with current Congressman Fulcher when he was a senator in the legislature, and that's really kind of where it kind of kick-started me down the political road with the incident that happened there, which I don't really need to go into, but
Okay.
it was fun and interesting anyway. But
Um, yeah. So you've been, a lot of people talk about how CUNA has changed and it certainly has grown quite a bit. Um, what have your observations been, and even also on the political side?
well, politically, it's always been fairly conservative. I think as far as changes, I mean, I remember when the sign was under 1,000 people in the Kuna city of Kuna. Uh, the sign on the post on their sign, the post on the sign, but now it's like 19 or over 20,000, I think. So it's grown a lot. There's very few businesses. It was didn't have much as far as restaurants. I mean, there was always little places that you could always go to, but the Ben's Diner, that was one of the biggest ones that there on Main Street, but it wasn't Ben's. I don't even recall what it was at the time, but yeah, it has grown substantially since then. Both traffic and the number of roads, the number of people, the school district itself. I mean, the current school district graduates probably more people than I had in my whole 4 years of when I graduated, the 4 years of high school population. So it's shows a lot. And of course, we only had the one high school. We had fewer elementary schools, so it's just a lot of changes.
Um, what do you think, for the better, for the worse?
Yes, better and worse. I mean, there's always pros and cons for growth. Pros that I mean, we got a lot more. We got more businesses. We got more things that we are able to do for the most part. Uh, but the bad part is, of course, there's a lot more traffic. There's a lot more people, and politically speaking, the more people you have, the more work you have to do politically. Um, Cuna used to be just kind of not really its own district. It always had parts of other places, kind of like what we do now. But with the amount of growth that we've had, is why it kind of bleeds into other counties in order to split things up properly. But yeah, Cuna had always been part of other places, but now Cuna
Right.
actually has at least a couple of districts within its borders. So it's grown quite a bit.
Yeah, I believe when it before they did the redistricting, the old districting map, didn't it cut CUNA in half or something with 22? Or how was
It
it?
does now.
Okay.
It does now. Um, so Cuna actually used to have the part of its district actually used to go up into Meridian a fair amount up to about the freeway up that direction. But now the the southern or our northern border for District 23 uh, has come farther south, and so it's cutting off into whatever that is, like parts of Columbia and Hubbard, and so it's come quite a bit south. But part of that has to do with taking in Owyhee County as well as Canning County as well. So that's part of why that is. But nevertheless, it's drastically the northern border has drastically come south.
Yeah. I was doing some analysis on the 2022 primary. 45% of the votes came from South Ada County.
Yeah,
So, and
yeah,
then,
that's the
yeah.
majority of
Yeah, the
pretty
vast
close to majority of the total number of votes.
and then it was 31% from South Canyon. So basically it's like 75% from just this area, the Ada and South Canyon.
Right.
So Owyhee just kind of, they're 25% of the vote, 24%
Right.
actually. So
Yeah. Yep. Quite a bit difference in population
yeah,
and the size of Owyhee County is just it is huge. It takes a long time to go from the east end to the west end because you got to go from basically the Oregon border all the way almost to Mountain Home. So that's almost a couple hours of drive right there. And but the people in Owyhee County, in my experience, they're pretty sharp, and they know what's going on, and they in some ways they have to because they have to deal a lot more with the federal government because of BLM and stuff like that. So they tend to be have to be more in tune with what government is doing because they have to deal with it a lot more than some of us as far as the federal side is concerned. And state, that's mostly what they're relying on as well. When we get into the larger cities like Kuna and Napa and Caldwell, then it tends to become more local because so many more people, and so they tend to have a little bit more influence. And really, everything's local anyway. But as you have, as you see with the amount of land that is controlled, who controls the land tells you who's going to have more power and authority over the lives of people. In the case of Hawaii County, it's federal government. In the case of Ada and Canyon County, it's going to be more the city and more the counties than it is federal government.
um, now in terms of politics, or at least referring specifically to Kuna, there is, a lot of people talk about the Californians churning. Well, there's debate on that.
Yeah,
But definitely, the city of Boise, has become more blue. But like for Kuna itself, um, have there, have you seen any huge shifts in the politics of the Kuna residents? Let's say
yeah.
the
I mean,
makeup.
there's always, but I wouldn't say that there's huge shifts. Um, at least as far as party is concerned. Now, who they vote for in the party, that may be a little bit different. So, like one individual that ran in 2022 for a different seat, he was actually a former, like many years ago, a former representative, like, uh, pretty old for running again, but he just felt like he needed to. But he was former representative for Kuna and pretty conservative. But now some of the legislators that I would say that we currently have, or we tend to go for, uh, to say conservative or not conservative, it's really kind of hard to say, because I tend to go, well, you're either conservative, as in you're more for the Constitution and limiting government, or you're conservative in that you want to conserve big government. So
Oh, right.
again, we're using the same conservative word, but two different meanings: conserve the Constitution the way it was intended versus conserve big government. And you can say you're conservative. So, but my definition, yeah, we're less conservative.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the tough thing in terms of labels, because
Right.
everyone's. It seems to be right now everyone's fighting over the word conservative, and even uh, Sean Diger is saying he's a true Republican, and he's been a Republican all his life.
Yep.
And then what is the other word that they're? Oh, yeah, Republican in name only is the
Right.
term. So if you had, now the question is how would you label it? And should the right, should they jettison the term, or should there be a continual fight over the term Republican and conservative, or just give it up and be like, all right, you guys can have it. We'll just choose this new one. What do you think about that?
Well, that's actually what happened because if we understand the word, for example, liberal, which is now kind of a dirty word and it means Democrat, really. But if you understand what the word means, liberal is actually more what the GOP stands for, as in more freedom. We're about more freedom, and so we are liberal, but now we have to say basically in a classic sense. So, but progressives stole that word, and that's how they become liberal, and we're now conservative because we're trying to conserve, uh, supposedly conserve the Constitution, conserve limited government. Um, if I was determining uh, any level of how Republican you are or how conservative you are, my only concern is the Constitution because that is where we derive all of our authority. That's where the representatives derive their authority. And so if we focus on that Constitution and the principles that are in there, not just the U.S. Constitution, but even the Idaho State Constitution, we would understand that one of the very first principles is it's we the people. And the U.S. Constitution says we the people do ordain. I'm leaving out the six things the government is supposed to do, but we the people do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States, meaning we the people gave authority to ordain. Like an ordained minister means you've been given authority. So any power that we the people have is what our representatives have. If we don't have that, if we don't have that authority as an individual, we can't give that to government. And so, if you look at that through that concept, as well as what powers were specifically granted in the Constitution, then we can see where the Republicans really should be standing for, if that's where Republicans believe that they should be standing, which you can ask almost any Republican and they'll say, yes, it's the Constitution. That's what's important. Everybody takes an oath. Anybody in government takes an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. Well, you got to understand what is in it. And obviously, by how government acts and the things that it requires of its citizens, they don't. They don't understand. And it's we the people also that are in a lot of cases failing to understand those principles, and so we continue to vote for those who don't have those principles. And because of that, that's where the fight comes in. Oh, these people are conservative, these people are rhinos, these people are Republicans, these are not, because we're failing, I think, as a whole to understand the Constitution itself. And if you ask anybody when the last time they read the Constitution, there might be quite a few that say, yeah, I've read it recently. Well, what do you understand about it? That's what I want to know. In fact, so with how I vote, with regards to individuals, with regards to anybody, I ask the same questions that George Washington asked when he was going to appoint somebody. And I think electing is the same thing as appointing, because we're appointing our representatives. His first question was, who are they? Are they good people? Are they honest people? What does their community think about them? And then if they're good people, his next question was, what is their affinity to the Constitution? In other words, do they know and understand it? Do they love that Constitution? Are they following those principles? Are they willing to follow those principles? And if they are, then he would appoint them. I don't believe, we don't hold our representatives to that same level. We may think they're good people. We may think they're wise or honest people. But if we don't understand the Constitution ourselves and what it is supposed to do, what it allows and what it does not allow, then how can we make that decision towards our representatives? Are our representatives going to make that correct decision? Well, we don't know if they don't know. We don't know if they will, if we don't know. So we don't think that, say, for example, here in Kuna, of course, in order to open up a business and run it, you have to go get a business license. Well, if we follow the Constitution and the idea that we, the people, have the authority, can I come to you and ask you to pay me for a business license? I'm going to give you a business license, but you cannot run your business until you come to me and I give you permission and you pay me money for that permission. I don't have that. I don't have that right or authority. as an individual. So how can I give that to government?
Right.
And in the case of Kuna, yeah, they do that. And every other county and city, they all do that. But it's like, really? By what, from what power that the people have, did they get that? Well, they didn't. They just took it.
So it seems like I guess the Constitution Party pretty much dumped the Republicans and said, "Yeah, we're not saving the Republican Party. We're just going to start our own." And they just started a
Yeah,
new
and they've been
name, right?
around. Yeah, they've been around for a while, and they, in some ways, their platform is pretty close to Republican Party platform in a lot of ways, but in some ways it is not. Um, if I if I had my say, there would be no parties because George Washington said parties are going to be the death of America. Just to put it, just to
So
put it mildly,
okay,
not exact quote, but he didn't think
that's
parties
pretty
were
interesting.
any good.
That's pretty interesting because rank choice voting has come up. Would that be a soft way to kind of make parties irrelevant, or what are your thoughts on
Nope.
that?
Nope. On ranked choice voting, what it's going to do, especially with regards to Republicans, is it's going to uh, give us the lesser and maybe even the greater of two evils. So the way the ranked choice of voting works is so Republicans especially tend to vote and have a very decisive uh, are very decisive when it comes to who they want in office, and they don't want anybody else. So, but the problem with the ranked choice voting is they'll go, yeah, I want Trump, or say Representative this person, and there's these other people. I don't like Biden, so I'm not going to vote. That's not going to be my second choice if we were basing it on that. Or I don't like these other parties, so I'm not going to vote for any of those. But if the first vote comes back and there's not a majority, then it goes to the second choice. Well, if you didn't put a second choice, your vote is gone. You
Oh,
don't have a vote.
okay. Yeah, yeah.
If
Okay,
you didn't
that's
put a
now.
second
Yeah.
choice or a third choice after that first choice, if there's not a majority winner, then your vote will no longer be counted. And
Okay.
that disenfranchises, in my opinion, voting because as especially as Republicans, we're very decisive. So it will hurt the Republican Party. But if we're really interested in a ranked choice, the best way to go about that would be to vote currently as it is. And if nobody's a majority winner, then you take the top two and have a runoff.
Yeah.
And then we will have a majority winning candidate, as opposed to currently, like in 2022, the like the current individuals, they did not get a majority of the votes. They got a plurality of votes, but they didn't get a majority. And that's what the ranked choice voting people, one of the things that ranked choice people say is, we want to make sure that we get a majority of votes. Well, they're going to get majority votes because they're going to eliminate some of those votes. Because I don't want second choice, third choice, whatever. I want my first choice. But if you don't put in that second, third choice, then your ballot is gone. It's done. So it's a bad way to go down. If we were interested in getting a majority, then we do runoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's coming up on the ballot. Is that in November? It's coming
Yep.
up, not in the. Okay, so it'll be interesting. What are you seeing as the future of Kuna, and I guess maybe the Treasure Valley in general? The next, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, unless you're planning on moving.
Well, boy, tempting. If I had my own island, then yeah, we'd just live purely by natural law, as opposed to any governmental law. If you don't understand what natural law is, then we would understand that, yeah, it's basically the two great commandments: love God, love your neighbor. You don't do anything to harm your neighbor. You don't do anything to harm God. And then everything's hunky dory. You can do whatever you want. kind of thing, as long as you're not hurting or injuring anybody. But then, you know, when you get government involved, then that's when the hurting a lot of times tends to happen, because then you pass laws and can't do this, can't do that, and just it gets things worse. The typical path of how governments go, they may, if they start off with a high degree of freedom, like we started off with in this country, it gradually deteriorates. And so I expect that deterioration to go unless something drastic happens. Now, if we follow what Montesquieu, if I remember correctly, Montesquieu said is when we get to a certain point, you have to scrap it. When it gets to a certain level of decay and degradation and whatnot, you just have to scrap and start over, which is what the Declaration of Independence says. When it gets to the point where government is actively trampling the rights of individuals, which we can almost say is certainly happening right now, it's time. It is the right and power vested in the people to scrap the government and start with a new government that they think will best serve their needs.
So, okay, there are talks. Well, obviously, every empire falls eventually.
Yep.
Now we can get into kind of very cuckoo world. So, uh, there's an invasion in the South. Biden, according to Gallup, most people don't even believe he was elected legitimately. So now we're kind of at this point where some people are predicting even that the U.S. as we know it, as a political entity as we know it today, will not exist. By the mid 2030s. So like a 10-year expiration date. How do you think Idaho and oh yeah, the Civil War, that movie just came out. So let's say the federal government or the U.S. dollar, that whole thing, collapses. What are you seeing how Idaho, with the way that politics are in, let's say, 10 years from now, and Kuna would all react? What would the situation, you think, be in our local area?
In our local area, I would say that we're still in pretty good hands as far, and I shouldn't say pretty good hands as far as government is concerned, but pretty good hands as far as we as neighbors are concerned. I think we're in an area where, if push comes to shove, that we will help one another in whatever situation there might be. Yeah, of course, there's going to always be those on the other side that think, that we're in a tough situation and there's nothing we can do about it and whatnot. But I think that as a community that we're still in a pretty good situation, even all of Idaho, as far as that is concerned. But that always comes based on the individual citizens. So there's always going to be people that will take advantage of whatever situation. If they suddenly perceive that there's no government, they're going to act that way. But as long as individual people like we have here in Idaho have the ability to defend themselves, have the ability to provide for themselves, we can survive anything. And as long as we're willing to help one another, which I think we're still in that position. But I think that would come more so because of individuals and churches and stuff like that that are intent on assisting and helping each other to survive whatever it is, as opposed to government, which is only about itself. Government is intent only on protecting itself. It will not be government. The first people that are on a scene in any kind of a disaster tend to be churches or the community itself, not FEMA, not any other organizations, not other government organizations, because they're slow to act. But people always act, and they will help. They tend to help one another a lot more than they would, So apocalypses, like you see, I haven't seen Civil War, but that, or like another example, which is not a very good example, but like The Walking Dead, and all of a sudden it's chaos and it becomes brutal, and I don't see that. I think, especially here in Idaho, I think people would have each other's backs. They would help one another. Of course, there's always going to be those that will not go down that road, but I think we're pretty good. And it's also partly the genius, I think, of the founders as well, having different entities of government. So you have the federal government that is completely national. And if they fail, we still have Idaho government. If Idaho fails, we still have our local counties and city governments if we think that they're going to be able to help. But if not, the people the people will come to the aid of each other.
Yeah, I think actually I asked this question to the IFF. They had a kind of an open question because their whole thing was, and you hear a lot of criticism about all the debt we're accruing from the federal government and how we're as a state, taking that money. I
Right?
think Medicaid is like 60% federal dollars or 80%, something ridiculous. Or it might be the entire Idaho state um, expenditures, 60% of it comes from the federal government. So the question kind of arose like, okay, well, let's say the federal government ceased to exist and there's only 40% left of the expenditures, you know, would Idaho be fine? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that in their case, one thing that Idaho very well could do, especially if the federal government collapses, is 60% of Idaho is controlled by the federal government. If
Right.
they've collapsed, then we will suddenly maybe have access to those federal lands, the natural resources, both wood, both mining, both gas, and so on, that the federal government just simply does not allow currently. And if they were following the Constitution, then they would be disposing of that land anyway, so that the federal government would only have just a few acres of land in Idaho to begin with, which is how the Constitution is supposed to work. But they long time ago decided, nah, we like to be in control, and they continue to take control and be more in control, and government just tends to go down that road. You give them a little bit of power. Well, like Lord Acton says, and it's kind of a cliche anymore. With power, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, that's the very definition of government. You give them a little power, and they tend to become corrupted and gradually become more and more corrupted.
Yeah, that'll certainly be interesting to see how the state. So I guess the governor and the House and Senate would decide. Okay, hey, look, now we got all this land. Okay, so here's a question. So if the federal collapses and you have all that federal land, BLM land, does it? I mean, does it come to logic that it would just suddenly become ownership transferred to the state? I mean, like how I'm sure there would be some legal battles for that, right?
Possibly, but that would be within the state of Idaho itself.
Okay,
I
yeah,
don't. If the federal government
that's
collapses,
true.
then wouldn't really matter. But they should be going after it anyway. Uh,
Oh,
Not necessarily the state itself, because if you look at some of the land programs that they've had in that the federal government has at the beginning, like the Northwest Ordinance and so forth, the intent was to privatize as much land as possible, not even giving it to the states, but all that land being more and more privatized. And that's how it worked. And if you look at some of those states back east, especially, there's very, very little federal land in those states. Once you get in the west, a little ways past the Mississippi, then you see a lot more control by the federal government because they decided, they prefer to keep things under control themselves and have it themselves, and as opposed to following the Constitution, which is to dispose of those lands. By dispose, it doesn't mean to destroy; it just means either sell it or give it away to individuals or to the states. Really, the intent from the beginning was to individuals. Which, if you think about it, who's the best people to? I mean, if you go to Disney World, for example, yes, that's a corporation, but it's still a private entity. If you go to Disney World, for example, you're not going to see a lot of trash. You're not going to see a lot of cities, part of it being degraded, or they keep it they keep it up because, one, not only do they have the money, but they have a reason to. Federal government, they don't have any reason to, which is why they're so mismanaged. The states do a little bit better, but I think that individuals do the best because they have a vested interest. It is their property, and they'll lose value if they don't take care of it.
Yeah, there was a debate over the Idaho Transportation Department and the land. They were voting on whether to sell it or not. And there was even a split amongst the Freedom faction, let's call them, or the I don't know what to call them.
Right.
They call themselves the real conservatives.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, but yeah, there was even a split amongst them because they weren't sure. I understand the I'm actually a commercial business owner. We lease space to the armed forces. They had a recruiting branch, and they just lease it, and then we are in charge of maintaining the facilities
Right.
because they don't, and so you don't want government hiring janitors and becoming basically uh, facility managers. I mean,
Right.
because every time they need, like for example, Ada County, one of the DMVs, I think they needed a carpet replacement, right? So if they just lease the space, if the DMV just lease the space, the landlord will be responsible for getting the quotes, the best price for the carpet and hiring for that. Instead, it had to go before the commissioners, and they had to debate whether to pay $30,000 for carpet replacement, and it had to go
Right.
through this entire public, process, and just like, you know what, you can
Yeah.
cut all that.
And then
But
you see
yeah,
other things like go out to visit somebody out at the prison, and the paint in one area, the waiting area, is just perfectly fine. The floors are perfectly fine. The seating arrangements are perfectly fine, and then they go about replacing that and making it nice or whatever, but spending money for things that is not needed. There's a lot of that goes on too. Why? Because they have money. It's getting near the end of the fiscal year or something, and it's like
yeah,
you've got to spend it or lose it. It's like I mean, that kind of accountability just doesn't work.
yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we'll see. Even on the county elections, um, those are some of the discussions about how uh, willing how close they get down to it. I've only seen Supervisor Davidson, or not, sorry, Commissioner Davidson. He was the one who brought up that carpet thing. He said, "Hey, we need the money. I don't think we should be changing the carpet now if we don't need to."
Right.
But then he got outvoted, and it's just like nobody, the politicians aren't
Right.
necessarily motivated to care about $10,000 when they have, you know, what is it, hundreds of millions of dollars in the
Right.
budget. They're like $10,000, whatever. Whereas if it
Yeah.
was me being a business owner, I'd be like, yeah, no, we're not changing that carpet. I don't care if
It's
it's
perfectly fine. Yeah.
yeah, if it's after 10 years, I don't care. But yeah,
Yeah.
it is what it
Yeah.
is.
That's the current problem with how. Yeah, I mean, that's just how government typically runs, and that is a serious problem. But some of that comes, some of the spending problems and those issues come because we're spending things on we're used to spending on things that we don't necessarily need. Um, you know, uh, and there's probably too many examples to list. But why do we need this department or that department? For example, with the on the federal government side, why do we need a health and human services? Uh, they can make it look like that is something that is needed because we should be concerned about the health of our citizens, but leave that in their own hands because they know what is best as opposed to government. I mean, a great example is the so-called uh, uh, affordable health care
Oh yeah.
that is now, instead of hundreds of dollars a month for a family, and now it's thousands of dollars. I mean, it's become really affordable. Why? Because government got got a hold of it and is in charge of that sort of thing. When you get government involved, people think Yeah, you got endless pockets, which in a sense they do, bottomless pockets, and that's how everybody thinks. And so, if it's your hand in the pocket getting the money, then yeah, you're cool with it. But if it's your pocket, that's a little bit different story. And with government, it's always somebody else's pocket.
Okay, well, I think we just hit the hour mark. I know you got to run some errands. I appreciate your time for discussing, the what do they call it? The endorsement process for District
Dean,
23.
yeah, endorsement.
Is there
Well,
any
recommendation
or
process.
yeah,
I mean, it's not an
recommendation?
endorsement, but yeah,
Oh, you're right. Yeah, they didn't use endorsement. They used the word recommended.
recommendation. Yep.
Do you have any ways people can follow you or your social media accounts or?
Well, as far as Facebook, I don't really have. I am on Twitter. I don't even use it that much either. But Michael, I think it's Michael Law Idaho on Twitter. On Facebook, it's uh, can't think of that one, but you can find it easily on Michael Law. But as far as that, my website is michaellawauthor.com, as you can see there. Book, but I have other articles on there as well, ranging from when the book first published in 2018. Haven't done much with that recently, but even just give you a quick example of things. There was one article that I did just before or just as COVID was hitting that I basically said, hey, look, we're going to look back at this and go, what did we do? And that was even before COVID really got into Idaho. And it's like, yeah, but yeah, a whole bunch of different things, a lot on local stuff, but I also try to keep things focused on the federal government as well. Um, but yeah, there's plenty there. I would start with the book because not a lot of people actually learn much about the Declaration of Independence. And one of the reasons why I wrote that book to begin with was simply most every book that I've ever read on the Declaration starts with, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and the pursuit of happy, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That is the government's job in protecting. Uh, that's about all that they ever talk about. So I went through the Declaration of Independence paragraph by paragraph, line by line, showing from the founders' point of view why they put those paragraphs in, why they put those charges against King George in, all of that from their point of view. But um, I was a certified teacher in history and government. Um, and the purpose was that is I didn't think it was being taught properly. But one thing that I did learn from that is you have to make history relevant. So also in the book, I also point when it comes to the charges of how government is doing similar things that King George was doing then. And I think we'll be surprised at how many of those charges that were laid against the king could be laid against the federal government now.
Oh yeah, no, they, that has been actually a lot of the discussion. Wasn't the Tea Party, when they threw the tea over, what percent of a tax was that? Do you remember what percent?
Very small, like
It was.
3%, somewhere in there, and we pay that just in sales taxes, three times that.
Yeah, I'm paying upwards of like 45%. When you get to the top brackets. So, well, if I was in California, it wouldn't be so much purely federal, but um, or I was back in the day. I ended up moving to Puerto Rico. There's
Right?
they there you pay 4% corporate tax, zero capital gains, and you're exempt from federal income tax.
Sounds
So
like I'm moving to Puerto Rico.
no, don't. I'm trying to move. I'm trying to move to Idaho. So the farm that I have, um,
Right.
I got approved for a subdivision, and that's where I'm building. Working on building homes. A lot of complications there.
Well, the interesting thing about the tax, we talk about that with regards to, and that's usually the only thing that is ever talked about with regards to why we separated ourselves from England is taxation without representation. But that is only one of 27 charges laid against the king. He wasn't allowing for laws to be that we thought were good for our people uh, to be included because he had the veto power. He was dissolving our legislatures. He was one of my favorites is he has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our citizens and eat out our substance. If you can't point to almost anything that the federal government is doing with regards to erecting a multitude of offices, harassing our citizens, eating out their substance, and you can even point to that within our state government in a lot of ways, then I don't know how it doesn't apply. I mean, that is one of my favorites of the charges, but there's 27 charges, and taxation is only one of them. And you can learn a whole lot more in the book, and even how government is still doing things that King George was doing then.
Yep, it is. Yeah, it is a very. What do they say? If the founding fathers were around, they would be losing their minds.
They certainly would. They would have probably. Uh, they probably would have taken back what was taken back or given back, I should say. Let's look at it that way. Given back the authority that the government has usurped and taken unto themselves back to the people where it rightly belongs.
Do you
Long time ago.
did you ever go into the Articles of Confederation?
I have went into the Articles of Confederation, and that can be interesting because I was kind of an in between when we decided to throw off government and before we got to the Constitution, and interesting things there, which is why, yeah, it was a perfect lead in to get us to the Constitution. It's like, we'll try this. It was a little bit too much anarchy, I guess you could say. Not enough government because at that time, federal government just didn't have really any power to control the states or control anything else. They just had no enforcement authority, and so they shifted just enough to give the federal government enough enforcement authority to keep states from exceeding their authority, and to it is for a more perfect union. But as is normal, as I've said before, you give them a little bit more power, then they go, ooh, a little bit more, and pretty soon they are out of control.
Well, it was a good experiment while it lasted.
Yeah, and hopefully we can keep the experiment running. But the typical move is away from government, or more and more and more government.
Yeah, yeah.
In some ways, I'm surprised that we got as much back as we did, though we did get it all back, pre-COVID versus COVID, uh, even including here in Idaho.
Yeah, would you say that was kind of perhaps a turning point in Idaho politics where like the where people woke up more, I guess, so to speak?
I think so, and I hope they continue to wake up more and recognize, hey, look, there's too much government. We need to cut back some of their powers and I should say, take back some of the powers that they have taken unto themselves, which they don't have any right or authority to do. But yeah, I think it was a wake up point. But I still think that after a couple of years of waking up, then it's like, hit that snooze button.
Yeah, yeah. I guess we will see. We'll have a better update on May 21st. Or wait, yeah,
That's
just
for
about
sure.
a couple weeks. We will
Yep.
see what the general sentiment of at least
District 23
yeah,
is, as well as everywhere else.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
At least here in Idaho.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time, and yeah, maybe we'll get a chance to see what other kind of drama comes up and talk about it then.
There's going to be plenty of drama, I'm sure.
All
Thank
right.
you for having me.
All right. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks.